I've heard it said that inside every one of us is a story to be told. Some of us choose to tell that story with our family and friends, at social events, and while others take the leap and write a book about their life and things and the ideas that they're passionate about. So which one are you? Are you that guy that goes around talking about your life and your passions, or are you an aspiring author? Listening to the latter might be scary, but today we have a guest who's a multi-best-selling author who's going to share with us not only his story, but what we can do and what we need to do to take that leap to becoming that inspiring author ourselves. Now, before we get into that, I just want you to know that being a man today has never been more challenging. And so the pain that we feel can be real. It's a pain of loneliness and unworthiness, and that is masked usually by our anger and our resentment. And it's all because we are uncertain and afraid to take that next step. So if you're tired and fed up of where you are at, where your life is at, then I'm going to encourage you to start your hero's quest, where you can become more, accomplish more, and live more than ever before. Go to members.theawakenedman.net and start your quest today. With that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. So what is that one thing that you would love to write about but are too afraid to start? And what if you had a mentor that could get you from idea to published author? Would that be of interest for you? For me, that next stage in my personal development and professional evolution is to become a published author. And I bet there are many of you listening here today who feel the same way. There's lots of different ways that we can do that. And today, I believe my guest has the experience, the expertise, and the passion to help us get there. So allow me to introduce my guest. Ryan is a two-time Canadian best-selling author, speaker, educator, and entrepreneur who is passionate about personal growth, education, entrepreneurship, and well-being. He is the owner of Foy Consulting, which aims to help people and small organizations move from good to great through his coaching services and his products. And his book, Your Best Decade, guides you through the three big areas of your life personally, professionally, and relationally, so you can make the next 10 years the best. Now, he's originally from Nova Scotia. Ryan has dedicated his life to pursuing wellness and is widely considered as a thought leader in the wellness and education sectors. In his free time, you might find him walking the trails in PEI with his wife, Amber, their dog, Dash. Welcome to the show, Ryan. How are things, brother?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Ellen, and great to be here for everyone tuning in. Welcome. You're in for a treat. This is going to be a great conversation, and I'm excited. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. And, this is one topic I haven't touched on yet with all this work that we're doing here at the Awakened Man and on the podcast. And so I'm really excited to dive into, what it would be like to be an aspiring author and also to help us really pull the story out that we tell people. But before we get into that, I want to start with a more personal story of yours that you could share with us. And as you know, we're all on our own hero's journey or our hero's quest, as I talk about it here. And if you can share with us a bit about your personal journey as that writer, what inspired you to start writing, and how has that writing evolved over these years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll make this quick, but when I was 12 years old, I was actually diagnosed with chronic migraines. And at 12 years old, that's pretty, it's a pretty kind of devastating diagnosis to get. And I was part of the study through a university in Eastern Canada to try to figure out what was causing these migraines. And at the end of the day, what I found through the study was that the days that I was active, I slept better, I was eating better, and I was less prone, if at all, getting these migraines. And so basically that put me on this trajectory from 12 years old to be, pursuing this idea of well-being. And what does well-being mean to me as an individual who needs to feel well and to not get these headaches? So really that's where my journey starts, because from that diagnosis, I picked up things like running, working out, weightlifting, became, a multi-sport athlete and all those sorts of things. And now I've gone on to create a career in that, and now a writer in the wellness space. So it's definitely been a crazy ride. I would say my writing journey specifically started in university. So I actually had a blog for any of the listeners out there that remember Blogspot. I used to have a blog on Blogspot. It was terrible. You can find it. It's called Wellness Network Blog. It's still operational, but I wrote because I really just wanted an outlet. I wanted to get what I was feeling out there. And, if I had ideas around personal development, spiritual well-being, physical well-being, training, I put it out. And that blog did fairly well, given how clunky the website was. But I did end up retiring that blog in about 2014 and took some time to try to reevaluate, what am I going to really do as a writer? I ended up stumbling on a great platform called Medium, which is a freelance platform for writers all over the world. It's fantastic. And I rose to the top of that platform relatively quickly with some other really awesome authors in the personal growth and development space. And that's really when I started thinking, maybe I can actually write a book here. And so it really took me a couple of years writing on Medium for some of the larger publications before I had the confidence to kind of step into that identity. And it really was that, Alan. It was an identity shift from going from a freelance writer to, a professional published author. And so at 29 years old, I sent it and got my first one published. I remember being terrified, and there's a lot we could talk about there in that journey, but yeah, just like, how are people going to respond to this? Is it, am I too vulnerable in my book? Have I shared too much? Have I not shared enough? Are people going to judge me? All those things came in, imposter syndrome was there, but I sent it anyway. And it's been making a huge impact on people's lives. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback on it ever since. So yeah, that's, I guess, a little bit about my origin story as an author.
And I just love that, Ryan. What I was just, feverishly making a bunch of notes. And what I really appreciated about you sharing that story is you're just letting us know that even in the beginning, writing on Blogspot, you're, right away, like, it was terrible and it's still out there. And I think for some of us who are perfectionists, I'm a perfectionist. It's my Achilles heel. And I really need to challenge myself to push through that and just to send it, hit send, or just start, write that line. And I think it's inspiring to hear you say that, it was terrible, but you had to cut your teeth. And in other options or in other avenues, they talk about, just getting the reps in. Well, how do you get a rep in? It's about writing. And then you move that, into Medium, and really was able to start to practice your craft and hone that in there. And yet still there's that imposter syndrome and challenge. And I think it's so prevalent for many of us men, regardless of what we're doing. And because we haven't really talked about, writing our own story and writing about, what our best decade is. And we'll get into that in a bit. I appreciate you being vulnerable today to say, hey man, like, that's just part of the journey. That's all part of it. And we need to be able to lean into it. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that summary.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And, my biggest, at that point in my life at 29, on the precipice of publishing my first book, I remember kind of feeling alone. Like there wasn't many people in my life growing up that I knew who were authors, yet alone in the specific area that I was writing in. And, the internet is great. Like, you can find a community, and I was able to find some folks to really, help support that journey. But it was, there were times where it was definitely, there were some lows there, and it was, quite lonely at times, just being like, why am I doing this? I'm doing it because I love it. But, there were some things at the time that I was sacrificing. A good example was, at the time of writing the book, I was a full-time teacher, and I was a young teacher teaching at an international school in the Middle East. And every weekend, everybody wanted to party. And I had my true north set on getting this book out. And I remember so many nights sitting in my hotel, writing, and just hours would go by. And I remember thinking, am I missing out on something here, or am I investing in the thing that I really want to invest in? And those were hard conversations to have with myself. And it's just like anything, whether it's podcasting, whether it's music, whether it's martial arts, whatever it is that you're passionate about, there's that give and take, and there is those things you have to say no to say yes to what you want to do. And I'm so grateful that I did, but I could have easily went the other way and the book would have never got out. So, here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true in a lot of different scenarios, right? About being able to know, to be able to say no to what you truly can say no to, and what you can say yes to. And I just want to, it made me think about, we also talk about having this, making sure that we're as men, that we're whole and complete in how we show up. And so how was that with your personal life and, with your marriage? Or I wasn't sure if you're married at that time or, dating or what have you, but how did that impact that, and how does help us understand how you manage those two, that scenario as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. I at the time I was engaged, and my partner was so supportive of my not only the ideation of my book, but actually helping me through the process. She was actually, one of my proofreaders and supported me along the way. Still supports my journey now as my wife, which is great, 5 years in, but yeah, I mean, I was very blessed to have a partner that supported me, especially, in those moments where I was wondering, why am I doing this? And should I really publish this? And, is it really worth the investment and those types of things? So, like I say, I was definitely very blessed there, Alan. And yeah, and then, I did have a bit of a community outside of that as well. Some close friends and mentors who, even though they hadn't written a book, they were entrepreneurs, they were thought leaders, they were go-getters, listening to podcasts, sharing resources with me and trying to help me, with what I needed as well. So definitely grateful for all the support that I had along the way.
Right on. Perfect. And I think it's a nice reminder for us to recognize that the choice is not or choice. It's an and choice. It can be that if we choose to make that and we understand what we're doing. And so we can still follow our passion and still, maintain the priorities that are important in our life. And, and when you have that support and because you've had the conversations, it just makes life even sweeter. Go ahead.
No, you're right. And one thing I should touch on as well, and this is actually a pivotal part of that book, is values. And it took me a long time to figure out my core values, and I've simplified them into what I call the 5 Fs. And these are not in order by any means, but they're all kind of at the top. So it's food, so good food, family, my fitness, how I spend my free time, and finances. And I remember when I was leaning into the book, I talk a lot about, if we're going to really be well and we're going to look at these big 3 areas of our lives and push ourselves with what we're passionate about, we need to know what we're passionate about, and we need to know what it is that we value. And for me, I wish someone was more direct with me when I was younger about that, because in school, we don't really talk about it a lot. And then as young men, we kind of, move through university or whatever trades we end up doing. And then we somehow figure it out. But this book kind of accelerates that process for the reader. So really challenges them to think about and actually identify what are those top values so that you can then set things in motion and live towards that versus kind of doing this and doing that and not really having that direction and that true north. And so for me, that was all kind of forming as the book was forming. And it was really nice convergence, not only for the reader, but for me in my own personal life as well.
Absolutely. Just love how you put that together because it is so true, right? And once we understand and we start to lean into our core values, and for a lot of us, it's work that we do here as well, that what we think we value or we say that we value, when we truly look at what our actions are, and that's the process I take my guys through is, okay, here's a core value exercise, and they go through that. And then the next thing we ask them is, okay, so what are your habits and actions? How are you living those? And sometimes it's a rude awakening. We say family is important, but guess what? We don't spend a lot of time with family. We're not investing into that aspect of our life. And so when we see that, then we can make those adjustments. But if we're learning on the fly and don't really have a plan in place, it can be challenging. And sometimes it's that brick wall that hits us before we realize that we've left a lot of stuff to our whim. And so I like that you're starting with that process, right? And then the other side of that coin is also about that it's evolving and changing. What we value today may be different than what we valued 3 years ago or 5 years ago, maybe even next week, just from life's experience.
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that I talk a lot about actually, is just doing a values audit. So just making a note on your calendar. whether it's 6 months or 12 months, life changes, careers change, where we're living changes. So many things are changing all the time, and we live in a very disruptive time. So being mindful of that, like even myself, I go through that practice a couple of times a year just to either realign those activities with the values, exactly what you're saying, or does something need to shift a little bit? And I encourage folks who are listening to do that too. It's super easy, just a calendar prompt and a couple questions, and away you go.
Right on. Love that. As I was saying in the intro, we talked about, maybe some of us being aspiring authors, and, we're going to maybe struggle finding that unique voice, kind of like what you were describing with your journey. So what advice can you offer for us as, help writers really develop and really hone and discover what their own distinct style is going to be like?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So one thing that I actually have done leading into this current book that I'm getting ready to publish is I've been reading a lot more. And I find the more I read, the more I identify with a specific type of writer. So early on in my writing journey, I would say I identified more with a writer like John C. Maxwell. But I would say later now in my journey, I identify more with writers like Seth Godin. They're like tactful and to the point, and sometimes a little pie in the sky. You got to really decipher it, So you change as a writer, and you'll identify with certain voices and the ways different writers articulate their message. So I would say, if you're looking to find your voice, look at who you admire the most in the work that you already read, and that's probably where your voice is, somewhere in the middle there, a blend between who you are and what you have to say and those writers that you follow and that you really look up to. So I'd say that that's one thing. Another thing for writers, and this took me a long time to figure out, is not to be the mayor of Vanilla Town. We do live in a time where, unfortunately, polar sells, right? And, really catchy things, the more kind of weird it is, or the more kind of off center it is, the better, or the more eyeballs tend to be drawn towards it. And so I've really leaned into that a lot more now as a writer versus when I was early on. I thought, I don't want to offend anyone. I don't want anyone to, come back and question anything in the book. And so I was very, very safe in the early days of my writing. But now I really push myself to live more on those fringes, to really challenge different readers who are coming in from multiple backgrounds to the book, to then be like, that's a really unique way. Maybe they don't agree with it, but maybe it hits them with what they need to start thinking about as well. So just towing that line is something that I find, as I've matured, is something that we probably don't do enough as writers, for sure.
Man, that's so inspiring to hear that. And, one of the things we do with my men's work is we have a book of the month, and next month's book is going to be with the brothers Karamazov. And it's the first time I've ever read him before. I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson, and, he talks a lot about it. And man, is that a hard read for me personally. And so it's probably not the first author I would want to emulate, but I have such appreciation for the depth of that and of that writing, and really trying to, because I've listened to so much input about this author, and we should take a swing at that one, because usually it's something a little bit more technical, like an Atomic Habits, or something along that lines. And so I really like how you position that, and really thinking about the kind of books and the authors that we're aspiring, that really inspires us and to help us find that voice. And it could be from lots of different places, and it will evolve as we start to do our writing.
Yeah, another thing too is the more I got into writing, the more I really enjoyed listening to concerts, listening to good music. And then I started thinking, I feel more like an artist. You know what I mean? Like I don't know what it is. It's like, a painter paints, a musician plays music, a writer writes, but musicians play music that's written, right? And some of the best music is written by the artist that has written their own music. And it's just words, right? So when you start thinking about it, you are that creative artist. And I've really embraced that. And the more, like, for example, just putting different illustrations in books, and, not being scared to step outside the box and just do something smaller, do something larger, do something a little more abstract at different times, throw in content in different ways, put put content on different platforms in different ways. And I've seen some other authors start to really play around with that. And I think it's great. I mean, I think, I don't know if you've read Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey.
Sure have.
Yeah, brilliant. Like it's a piece of art. Like you pick up the book, and I mean, even the paper is like a specific type of paper. He's got his graffiti and his bumper stickers and the artwork that he designed. I'm like, this is exactly like he is not just a writer, he's a pure artist. Like it's just so well done. And then the audiobook that he does and all of that, it's just, yeah, that was something that I was like, that is very well done. And I think we need more of that, especially from men. Like we have great stories. There's so many of us that are kind of artists by nature, and we've kind of, hid that away from the world, and don't be afraid to share that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We were hearing you talk about McConaughey's, and I was thinking of Goggins' book, and I did that as an audio book. And the audio book, he always adds more. There's more stuff than what's in the written version, and you know what Goggins likes. So it's a bit salty. So you have to be mindful of who's around when you're listening to this, especially if you have young children. But it's just a different way of how they're portraying, and gives you more background and color of the book to get an understanding of where he was coming from. Really it can be pretty daunting to be an author, I would imagine, right? You're sitting there and you have to you talked about, giving up time to do other things, and things are fun and to really do that. So what would be some practical strategies or routines that you follow to help an aspiring author stay motivated and to help overcome maybe a writer's block? Because I'm sure that's something you've encountered as well.
Yeah, so I recently read a really good book by Seth Godin called The Practice, and it's just a little book, and it's so well done. And the practice is what you do, whether it's you're teaching, you're driving a truck, you're a writer. The biggest thing is you practice it and then you ship it. And the best way that he talks about avoiding the writer's block is just to write a little bit every day and ship it. Some days it's less, some days it's more. And I mean, he's written a blog, I think, every single day for a lot of years. And so, there's someone that has really kind of taken a hold of the practice and put it into reality. And, for me, I was basically, with this last one, the way my life is kind of lined up right now, it's a little bit more hectic. And so I knew that my focused writing time was much more narrow than it would be in the past. And so I was like, okay, I'll get up an hour earlier in the morning, and I would crank out 40 to 45 minutes of just good, uninterrupted writing. It obviously takes you a lot longer to get a book out when you're going at that pace, but the richness is still there if you're able to be okay with that. And that was hard for me because I had more that I wanted to write after 45 minutes, but that's all that I had for that time. So I would say definitely look at where your lifestyle's at and what can you fit in and when. And also, when are you the most creative? Because some people are more creative later at night. Some people are more creative midday. For me, I'm the most creative if I wake up at like 2 a.m. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this is like the most creative I am ever right now. But it's definitely first thing in the morning. When I get up, I am ready to rock, coffee in hand, and I'm very, very creative with my writing and function the best. So really looking at where your energy is the best for that, and then just continuing to practice that. And when I coach writers, one of the biggest things I emphasize is like, don't get too hung up on grammar. Don't get too hung up on structure. Just write. And I think the nice thing that we have right now at our disposal is AI. Like if we do get stuck, we can go to AI and say, hey, I've left off here. This is the chapter that I'm working on. What are 10 other things that maybe I could be thinking about to say in my book? And then let the AI help inspire you or give you that additional idea that maybe you were getting stuck on, to then, write it down and go and expand on it later. So I think there's some great things out there to really help with that. And definitely, an author coach can really help too. But the tools that we have with AI right now, I think, are just phenomenal for writers for that.
That's a great point, for sure. Using it to help spur and in the right context, right, of being able to help move that through. And the other point I know I jotted down here was, using the time of when you're most creative. And absolutely, I find for me, I'm most creative in the evening, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And then I get an idea. And then that little voice goes, well, you know what'll happen, Al, if you sit down and start working, you're going to be there till 2 a.m. Oh, I got to get up early. And then I don't go. And then sometimes I don't go do it. Other times I do it, and and that's the result. But the energy of that process, that creative process, is so powerful. And I think leaning into that more. So thank you for validating that. Just listen to that little voice and go after it and see what comes of it.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing too is we tend to, and McConaughey actually talks about this in his book. It's something like, structure creates freedom. And, when you create these structures, sometimes we're like, oh, are we too structured? Or, structure is mundane, but structure actually gives us freedom. And when we look at that, it's actually quite liberating, right? Like, so if you only have 5 hours a week to do something, that's there could be a highly structured amount of time where you can be free to create in that 5 hours. And so when you really start thinking about it, whatever that looks like for you, it is about perspective, right? Where it's like, yeah, maybe we only have this amount of time, but think about all the creative energy you can put into that time. And it's surprising what you can come out with, right? As I'm sure you know, right? So it's definitely really cool to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dive into in your book, Your Best Decade. What really inspired you and the concept behind it? And what are the themes or messages that you're hoping readers are going to take away from this book?
Yeah, so the book actually started when I was driving to a community in northern Alberta when I was working out in Western Canada, and it just hit me. I was driving down the highway. I had to pull over. I pulled up my phone and I wrote down the different chapters of the book right there. And I remember being like, okay, I'm going to drive into town. I'm going to go to the first Tim Hortons I see, and I'm just going to continue this thought. So I literally did that, drove into the next town, went to Tim Hortons, and just started writing. And I didn't know what was going to happen, how long I could really write for. But that's really how the book started. It took me a long time to kind of get it to publication, but the origins was not fancy. It was just side of the road, middle of nowhere, Tim Hortons. So that's really where the inspiration, I guess, came from. It was super organic right from the get-go. But the idea when I actually went to publish it was that I want to make an impact, and I want to, create something that maybe somebody out there thinks about this differently because of the way I wrote it, and it makes their lives better in some way. And obviously, books are great for that because they can reach so many people all over the world now with the tools we have and platforms like Amazon. And so I'm really grateful for that. But some of the big things I would say that are kind of overarching themes in the book. Obviously, I talk a lot about values. And as soon as I talk about values, I also talk about the power of intentional living. And I'm sure this is something you talk a lot about with your men's groups as well, and talking with other men is intentionality is huge, and it's very hard to do, right? And I talk about kind of this continuum of there's over here of not living with intention, and that doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're just not living with intention. And then you kind of enter into this middle space of somewhat living with intention, but sometimes not, and that's okay too. But really where we want to be is on the far side of that continuum where we're fully living with intention. And I kind of guide the reader through that process as well in the book, which is something that I think is unique and just a different way of kind of looking at that. And then one of the big pieces that I talk about kind of later on in the book is the analogy of burn the boats. And this is an old fable. We know this. I'm sure folks listening in have heard the story, but essentially I kind of talk about that and how do we apply it in those big three areas of our lives, our personal, our professional, and our relational areas. So for example, do we need to let go of a toxic relationship that's just holding us back? It's just not serving us. That's just really, not allowing us to be our best. And so how do we do that? Especially if it's family, especially if it's somebody from high school that we've always had around. That's very, very hard because we're human and we care. But we also have to protect our own well-being if we're going to live our best decade. And so I kind of talk a lot about that and time takers versus time creators are some of those pieces that I embed in there too. And then there's some other overarching pieces around how our energy is spent, abundance thinking, abundance mindset, and kind of, when to say no, when to say yes. But lots in there, lots of good nuggets. I had a reader actually 2 weeks ago come up to me and he's like, so what makes this book any better than this book? And I'm like, well, actually, they're both great. And, there's thousands of books on personal growth and development and well-being. You can choose whatever one you want. It's just maybe mine has a different way of saying it that maybe meets you where you're at. And I think that's really what makes a good book is it's really a book that meets you where you're at when you need it most. And I don't know if you've ever read, what's it called? It's by Parker J. Palmer, Let Your Life Speak. I don't know if you've ever read that one.
Oh,
So
sounds interesting.
yeah, it's a very good one. It's very, very tiny. It's super philosophical. And if someone had gave me that book when I was 25, I would have laughed and been like, there's no way I'm reading this. But when I was 32 or 31, when I read it, I'm like, this is like brilliant. And I think when I pick it up again at, 45, I'm gonna be like, wow, this is like next level. So I think it's like the book didn't change. It's just it's where it meets you on your life and where you're at. I think it's the most important thing. And finding those books for you is the most important thing that you can do.
I completely agree with that. I just was writing down, living authentically, right? When you talked about your book, really, you're talking about about people learning to live authentic of who they are and really expressing that. And I think that is cool. And I also like you're talking about, we get inspired by books because they meet us where we're at. And, and I'm standing up today to do this podcast, but to my right, your left, I have a row of books that are really ones that inspire me and remind me of my work. And one of them was, and I read this about when I was 32, and it's because I was going through a real hard time in my life, but it's by Og Mandino, and it's a book's called University of Success, and he's got like 50 of the greatest books and excerpts out of some of them ever written. And I got to tell you, it's a whole journey from being a child all the way through. Like there's Acres of Diamonds in here and lots of other famous books. It had such a profound impact for me that I'd like to thumb through it and go through a chapter or two. And as I talked about being an aspiring author, I've always envisioned and dreamed of being like today's version of Og Mandino, and the little pocket book is 120, 150 pages long that you can read on a bus or whatever, but it has a clear message. It's inspiring, and and it deals with a specific topic. And so I was thinking about that as you're talking about the books in our lives, and I go back and think the ones that I needed were there at the right time. And so it's not necessarily about, is that a better book than someone else's, but it's because the message just hits you at the right
Absolutely.
time. And you talked about letting our voice speak. And I think that's what's so great about books is that we're getting to hear that author's voice and what he or she was going through at that time writing. And that's why I'm really excited about going through the Dostoevsky's book and getting a sense of what he was going through with this, because it was his last book of his life. So but I just love the stuff that you're putting together there.
Yeah, someone asked me, they're like, oh, would you, how did the question go? It was like, how did you know it was time to publish the book? And I remember saying to that person, there's always edits. Like you could always go back and make edits because you grow as a writer. But at some point, you just have to publish it. And, I even think about someone like a John C. Maxwell or some of the authors you're talking about. I'm sure they go back to their first work and they're like, oh, my soul, like this book, right? Yeah, there you go. Perfect, right? John C. Maxwell. So I'm sure he looks at his first work and he's like, wow, I've grown so much as a writer to where I am now. So, we're all human and we're all on this journey. And the best artists, it's the same thing. Sometimes they're playing their first song for 5 people before they become, the next Luke Combs or whatever. So you just never know. You just got to ship it and be confident and hope it all works out, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. I'm glad you're starting to talk about publishing, because that's my next question. There's so many different publishing options out there, right? And they've really expanded in these last few years. There's still that traditional idea of publishing, right? And then we go all the way to self-publishing, and there's so many ways around that, and using ghost authors and writers and all that. So what are your thoughts on all these different avenues, and what advice do you have for authors trying to decide what's the best route for them to publish?
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is that there's never been a better time to be an author. I think that the next 10 years is the best time. now with AI at our fingertips, Amazon has improved its functionality so much. Its algorithm is the best kept secret. No one really knows how it operates. But if you stick around long enough, you start to figure it out a little bit. And it really does favor things that are different and new voices. And it is really right out of the gate, it's fair, whether it's option A, option B, or option C for the market. So yeah, when you look back at the early days of the internet and where books were to where they are now and how easy it is to get different formats of books out and different ways for listeners and readers to interact with you, I think it's just an incredible time. So I would say, yeah, if you're aspiring to get a book out, there are coaches out there that you can invest in as well. That's something that I do. I try to help accelerate the process for writers and make it efficient and fun for them because it is a labor of love, but it's also something you should enjoy as that identity shifts from, your other career to now wearing this author hat. There are some things that come with that. And so, definitely investing in that or seeking out someone that you trust who's either walked that walk or who is a coach is really good. But honestly, there's so many great avenues. You can go on YouTube and you could find some videos on how to do it as well. People like to go that route. But yeah, like I say, with the tools that are at our disposal now, it is quite easy. There is someone I follow. Folks might have seen him on the internet. His name is Nicholas Cole, and he's really big on the ghostwriting experience. And he's actually out right now to publish, I think, 16 books this year, which is insane, but a very interesting author. And he has completely dismantled the traditional author kind of a way where, we would tend to 20 years ago only go the traditional publishing route. Whereas now it's more, you're seeing more and more authors become self-published, which is where I am as a self-published author. And I think that, that's much easier. The barrier to entry is much lower. And I think you could do it tomorrow if you really wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about the journey. I think like years ago, I read The Wealthy Barber and his story about, selling his book out of the back of his car, and traveling and doing all that, to where today it's, basically you can put it up on Amazon. It takes a little while to figure out how to do that, but once it's done, it's there. And just how much the journey of self-publishing has really changed. And we can just lean into it and utilize the tools. And I really like I think you hit the nail on the head too. We all need coaches and mentors. If we really want to make that step, we need to lean into that and use and get invested in folks such as yourself, Ryan, to help us, get through that piece. And, even professional athletes making millions of dollars a year still have coaches. And so far be it for us to be too proud to use a coach. And so I think, having you on here is also a big reason to help, the guys that are listening to this to say, listen, if you have that story inside of you, we have somebody here who can help them with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And another thing, just to mention on the traditional versus the independent or self-published route, is there used to be kind of a stigma around, oh, you're only self-published. I haven't really gotten that. And with the writers that I'm following, they're going the self-published route, and that stigma is gone. I mean, there's still the prestige of, New York Times, obviously Wall Street Journal bestseller, absolutely. And for those labels, you need to go the traditional publishing route for sure. But aside from that, you could still get speaking gigs, you can do sales, you could run a business. There's so much. If you invest in it and you do it right, and you seek out a coach and understand how to use the platforms that are at your disposal, it's really they're equal playing field at this point. So yeah, I just want to throw that note in for listeners out there that are curious about that.
Yeah, great point. Love that. So listen, you're an author, but obviously you read. So tell us, what book is on your nightstand?
Well, actually, I'm just getting over COVID. So I cranked out 2 books during that time. I just finished a book called Balance. I'm going to blank on the author's name, Andrew Hellman, maybe. He's a Canadian author. He's an international teacher. I think he's from BC. Really interesting. It was on finance and investing. He definitely had a very different, unique approach. And then just prior to that, I read 10x is better than 2x by an author who's actually writing on Medium at the same time as me. And I am going to meet this guy at some point, but it's Dr. Benjamin Hardy. He does a lot of work. He's got a lot of really good books out there, but actually we've been in contact. There might be a special surprise coming for you, Alan, but I can't commit to it yet. I'm waiting for Ben to send me something, but if all goes well, there may be a gift for you coming your way. So, but yeah, Ben is a fantastic author, and that book is just awesome. It's basically like, how do we shift our mindset from going, just 2x to 10x? And 10x is like, or a 2x decision is you just double the output. You just double your revenue, you double your client list, and that's great. 2x is great for a life, but 10x is a completely different ball game, and how do you think like that? And how do you have the confidence go get that? And so the book really talks about that, and it really challenged me as a coach, but also as an entrepreneur on, what can I do to start thinking about that? So it's definitely a recommended read.
Right on. Love that. Of everything that we spoke about today, maybe there's something we didn't get a chance to touch on. What would be the one takeaway you'd like our listeners to have?
Yeah, I think the one takeaway is I'm really big, and I talk about this in your best decade. I'm really big on adding value daily. Whatever you do, whether it's carpentry, driving a school bus, even if you're retired, find something you do and just add value daily. And when you add value daily, good things happen. And not only is it sense of purpose, sense of pride in what it is you do in your craft, but also the ripple effect of, your leadership permeates beyond your bubble over time. And I think when you add that value and you do it day in and day out, and you show up and you ship the work, great things happen. And I've seen that, and I'm a bit of a product of that. I don't have any more talent than anybody else out there. There's a lot more talented, way more talented folks than me, especially writers, but you just show up and you just ship the work, and you put in the value, add that value, and good things happen. So I'd say that's probably how I would end it on here today.
And just love that. Just as outstanding. I want to say thank you so much, Brian, for spending time with us today. And I think, you've been able to inspire us, those aspiring authors that we are. And we can do that if we want to lean into our stories and write about things that we're passionate about. So if anyone's interested in getting a hold of you and participating in your work, what would be the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, in the past, I used to say Twitter, but I don't know whether to say Twitter now or X, or if anybody's even there. So I'm going to say LinkedIn. So check me out on LinkedIn. You could also just Google Ryan Foy, spelled Fahey, and it should be the first name that pops up. You can check out my website. There's a widget on there where you can get a hold of me. But yeah, just, I guess, LinkedIn, website, anywhere on Google. Love to connect.
Absolutely. And I want to make sure all that information's in the show notes, as well as wherever else we can find you on social media. People can creep your pages and get an opportunity to meet with you. I thought today was an outstanding conversation, one we haven't had yet and we should have had sooner. So I really appreciate you diving in and sharing what you've done.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Alan. And for all the listeners out there, thanks again for spending some of your day with us. I hope it was valuable for you, and keep doing what you're doing.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.